Hello, this will be part 3 in the foliage prop creation tutorial series. Last couple of videos we talked about how to model modular tree parts and how to UV map them. So we left it off by finalizing the UVs for each one of our parts. And my next step is I'm actually going to go take this to texture in Substance Painter, and then we will come back into Maya and make our tree out of our parts. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to create a PBR texture set. So it's going to be a base color, metallic, roughness, normal, and we're also going to add an opacity map to this. The opacity map is going to be in the alpha channel of the base color, and Substance Painter is going to push that out for us in that way. So that way areas like our leaves, all of these pieces down here, are going to have a transparency associated with them to make them look more like defined leaves. Alright, so what I've done is already created a project folder and I'm going to be saving out my exported model, my final Maya file, my texture maps into this folder. What I've already done is, in order to create a more natural looking leaf, I've taken some images of a leaf, such as this one right here, that I've just found online, and then I've converted that into a black and white texture map. This is going to be used to be able to paint the transparent areas for my leaves. So the black areas will be completely transparent, the white areas will be completely opaque, and then the gray areas, depending on how light it is, will be semi-transparent. So I have 3 sets of images, and I've created a square image, which is 2048 by 2048 pixel image, to import into Substance Painter to texture transparent details with each one of these leaf textures. So I've already created that. You can go into Photoshop, find some images online, and convert them to a black and white image. The background has to be black. That area is treated as transparent. And then any of the light valued areas, I purposely made them grayscale because it's not going to come in with color detail. It's just going to pull in for transparency detail. So there need to be square images, and I'm using a 2048 by 2048 image. So I've already created that. That's what I'm going to use as a basis to create the transparency. We're going to go ahead and export out our objects for our tree. So let's go to File, Export Selection from Maya, and we'll go find that folder, and we'll save this as Tree Export. I'm using OBJ file format, so I'm going to keep all the same settings. I'm not going to change anything. And we'll do export. Alright, so then in Substance Painter, we're going to create our file so we can build the transparency. There's going to be a specific template preset within Substance Painter. So if I go to File, New, and before I import my model in, I'm going to change the template from PBR Metallic Roughness to the next one underneath that, PBR Metallic Roughness Alpha Blending. Alpha Blending will do 2 things. It gives me the opportunity to paint on and create opacity transparency detail. And for anything that has flat one-sided planes, it'll render both sides. So if I go back to Maya for a second, any of these plane structures, with the default PBR Metallic Rough, it's not going to render the bottom side. So this method will render for the material both sides. So back in Painter, make sure you change the template to Metallic Roughness Alpha Blending. Then I can go find my tree project here and tree export OBJ file. I'm going to change my document resolution to 2048, and then we'll click OK. So we want to make sure our model comes in properly and that it is displaying both sides of any flat planes like our leaf areas. We also want to make sure our UVs come in properly. So I have just one material for everything, so I'm going to go ahead and rename this. So we'll say tree, just tree, we'll call it tree. And the next thing I want to do is go ahead and add the base mesh maps, so that way I can use smart materials. So we'll do a quick demo for what the regular base color, metallic, roughness, and normal will look like, and then we'll focus more on transparency. So first off, I'm going to go to Texture Set Settings and Mesh Maps, and I'm going to click Bake Mesh Maps. I'm going to make sure from the prompt that I change the output size to the same as my document resolution, which should be 2048. And then I'm going to click Bake Selected Textures. Let it run through its process. So this allows any smart materials to look at the geometry and use the geometry detail to bake that textural detail onto the model. 100%, we're good to go. So there are all the maps that it just built: normal, ID, ambient occlusion, curvature, and a bunch of other ones. So once I start to build my materials, you'll start to see that detail become available. Alright, so let's build a couple of base materials for the bark of the tree and then the base leaf texture, and then we'll come back and talk about opacity. So the first one I'm going to create is the bark, and I'm just going to layer on different material detail here. I'm going to find the wood rough and just drag that over layer 1. This is a regular wood material, so I'm really focusing on what it looks like on the bark. And a couple things I'm going to change to begin with is I'm going to change the rotation. So under the properties, I'm going to change the rotation to, let's see, 90 degrees. That'll follow the length, down the length of the tree. I'm going for more of a oak type tree that we have more vertical striations instead of horizontal striations. And then I'm going to come in here and kind of play with the color a little bit. So let's see, kind of mid yellowish color here. Do a little bit of orange to it. There you go, that looks alright. Look at technical parameters. I want to increase my height range some, and we'll see if that will be visible. See in some areas. There you go, so you can see it pulling that out more. I want to make it look more bumpy, like that right there. That looks pretty good. Look at the height position, and I don't think that's going to do too much right now. But the height range should. I'll pull that up a little bit. Alright, so the next thing I want to do, and that's just a regular material, it's not looking at the geometry, but gives me a good base, is I'm going to start adding some smart materials. So let's do a smart material. Let that load. And I'm going to use a couple of the base wood materials here. So I'm going to start with the beech vein, wood beech vein. I'm going to drag that on top of the wood rough, like above that. So it'll override that. But what I want to do is open up that folder, and with the smart material I'm going to drag my wood rough base material above my base wood that's in the wood beech veined folder. Okay. So that'll kind of layer that material on top. So I already have some kind of base striations and detail, which is neat. Maybe I'll pull the base wood above that base metal, or sorry, wood rough material. And let's change the color of that a little bit. Once again, kind of like maybe this one's a little bit more red. There you go. And let's lower the opacity some on it. There you go. So we'll kind of blend those two materials together. Maybe not that much, but we'll kind of drag it back and forth here. Here we try with some other blending modes as well. Overlay, which might be neat to see. There you go. That could add some layered detail to it. We can look at other layers here. So there's a wood fibers, and maybe with this material I'm going to come in here and crank up the height with this as well, so you can see it's making more fibers become available. There's a wood vein. I don't think I'm going to mess with that one too much. There's a dirt, so maybe I'm going to increase my dirt a little more. Play with this a little bit more here. Play around some of the grunge values here so we can add more dirt, more contrast with the dirt. There you go. Now you can really see that dirt come up here. Maybe we'll randomize it a little more. Maybe we'll pull the contrast back some, and then drag the opacity down. There you go. A little bit of dirt to vary that detail. All right. So then I'm also going to add a couple other materials on top of this. So let's use this. Let's see which one. Wood ship hull old. So part of making materials more believable is just layering that detail on top of each other. So with this wood ship hull, I'm going to go down to the bottom of that, And I'm actually going to remove out, let's just turn off the base for it. Yeah, that looks good there. So what I really want this material for is all this kind of dirt and edges and stains and things like that. I don't want the base material, so let's just remove that base material, and any materials underneath that will fall through that. I don't need this really secondary color. Wood fibers, I can remove that. See what veins, there we go. So there's the kind of scratched veins in there. Maybe I'll change the color a little bit of that scratched veins. There you go. Make it match a little bit more. See if the rotation is going to affect this. So, nope. So we'll go into the veins mask, directional scratches. There we go. And we'll rotate them around some. Can't see them now. There you go. So they're a little bit easier to see. Maybe we'll do that, and then we can go down and put more on there. So that creates some good indentations, which is what kind of I'm looking for here. All right, so that adds kind of more indentations to it, which is neat. There's a dust layer. See if we can even see that. Yeah, it's probably one of the vertical areas. Nah, I want to remove that one out. Edges, that kind of highlights some of the edges in there. So I think that's some kind of interesting detail. I think I'm going to leave that one in there. Let's look at dirt, see what the dirt looks like. It's kind of like a smaller level of dirt. Let's try white stains, bigger stains. So there's that kind of darker patches. So maybe we'll come back and draw that down some. It'd be nice to see some of that variation, but perhaps not as much. So let's randomize that, pull up the contrast a little more. There you go. Pull this back up so maybe we can see it. So there you go. So that way it just adds more variety to the material there. All right, let's try one more. So I'm actually going to go away from wood and let's look at a steel. Steel ruined. Okay, so I'll put that on top of everything. All right, one thing I don't want is it to look metallic. So let's go back in here, and I'm really just going to start using some of these other layers on top of it. Edge damage, but I don't want this base material in here. Roughness, dirt. I'm going to remove that one out. We'll leave bumps. We'll see what else. We'll start taking off some of these. There you go. We don't want edge highlights on there. I still want it to look like wood. There you go. So you can see how that's adding even more variety to that wood material. Then that might be too much. So I can come in here to each one of these little maps and play around with, you know, the grunge amount. Maybe I have a little bit of grunge, not that much. And we'll look at edge damage. There you go. A little bit of highlights on there, which is kind of nice to see. Well, dirt's kind of interesting, so maybe we'll drag the amount of dirt down some, but there you go. All right. So that's starting to look pretty good. Maybe it's a little bit too intense of like wear on that. So let's just drag that opacity for the entire layer down. We just want a little bit of variation there. Okay, so we have a pretty good base for our wood material. So what we're going to do next is actually create a group and then put all of our materials for our wood bark in that group, or folder, sorry. So if I add a folder, this kind of creates a group here, and I can say tree bark, and then I'm going to put my 3 materials that I just created in that folder. So that's really nice because I can come in here and turn that on and off, and it affects all of those materials that I just created. Now I don't want this material to be affecting my leaf area. So what I'm going to do with that folder is create a mask. So I'll do a white mask on the higher folder, and I'm going to get my polygon fill tool, and I'm going to switch to the UV chunk fill, and with the white mask I'm going to change my value to 0, And then I'm going to come over here and left click and drag on my areas of my UV map that I don't want this material to affect. And you can see it's going to slowly take away this material from those areas. So basically just this bark material or folder is just going to affect my bark areas, not the leaf areas. So it's an easy way to kind of set up folders and organizing materials by creating a new higher folder, putting a mask on that new higher folder. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is actually create a base material set for the leaves. So I'm going to go back to the regular materials and I'm going to find leather rough. So sometimes there's not going to be a base material that can be used for a lot of other materials, so there may not be a base leaf material. I want that's kind of procedural and randomized, so that's a pretty good start for it. Let's go ahead and change this to a kind of a green color, something like that. Maybe I'll increase the scale some more so it's much smaller. Look at the technical parameters. Maybe we'll increase the height range so it's a little bumpier. Okay, you kind of see how that will change that maybe. There you go. So that's a pretty good randomized base. Then I'm actually also going to add a concrete, which one am I going to do? Concrete bear. Yeah, we'll try concrete bear, which is another kind of randomized material. It has a little bit more color variation to it, if you can see that. So let's see what happens if we just do like overlay. That looks kind of neat. There you go. So it might be a little bit too contrasty, so maybe we'll change luminosity, saturation a little bit. Okay, we'll leave the hue as is. Then now let's just kind of blend that back a little bit. There you go. So that's a little bit of subset kind of bumpiness and color variation to it. There you go. That will give us a kind of good base for what the textures look like. Maybe I'll also come and increase the scale some. Let's just do 4. There you go. So it adds a little bit more of smaller, darker areas to it. Alright, so that's going to be my base for my leaves. So let's create another folder. And we'll call this one Leaves. And then we'll add those two materials to that Leaves folder. There you go. Alright, so now I have a folder of materials for just my leaves. Let's go add another white mask to this. And this is to the folder. Go back to our polygon fill and UV chunk with a black value. And now I'm going to click and drag on my bark areas because I don't want my leaf material on my bark areas. Okay, so what we've done so far is set up a leaf folder structure of materials and then a tree bark folder structure of materials. Alright, so that's a basic texture creation of base color, roughness, metallic, and normal. So now we're going to talk about how to create opacity detail. So this will be the end of this video discussing kind of base color, base PBR structure. The next video we're going to come back and talk about opacity and how to set that up.